If you believe that the Bible teaches a simplistic monotheism, clean, direct, no internal fractures, that it shouldn't exist. If you were taught that there is only one God and that any other interpretation is paganism, historical error, or modern heresy, that it shouldn't exist. If you've learned that biblical faith never flirted with tension, ambiguity, or dangerous language, that it shouldn't exist, but it's there, not hidden, not encrypted, not in a footnote. It's in the center of the text, in the body of Scripture, no apology. God is in the divine assembly, in the midst of the gods. He judges. Read this slowly. It is not an obscure psalm. It's not fringe poetry. It's not symbolic language that's easy to dismiss. It's a scene, a place, an action. God standing in the middle of other gods. That doesn't sound like a comfortable metaphor. It doesn't sound like devotional language. It sounds like something that it shouldn't be there, and yet it is. This text was not discovered in a recently opened cave. It didn't come from the Dead Sea yesterday. It wasn't smuggled into the Bible. He's always been here, read for centuries, recited in synagogues, copied by scribes who knew exactly what they were writing, and nobody removed it, because they couldn't. This is not a lost gospel. It is not a rejected apocryphal book. It is not a Gnostic heresy buried by the church. It is Psalmo 82, and he doesn't whisper, he claims. And the statement comes into direct conflict with everything you think you know about God. Because now a problem has arisen that cannot be ignored, a problem that cannot be solved with ready-made phrases. Either the Bible fails here, or we fail to read it. There is no comfortable third option. If the text is wrong, therefore, he contradicts the very theology he claims to uphold. But if the text is correct, so something was lost along the way, something was softened, something has been simplified, something was taught incompletely. And perhaps the problem was never the text. Perhaps the problem was reading it too quickly, reading trained not to see. The reading rushes by, rushing through the difficult verses. Because this psalm doesn't explain itself, he points back and onward. He talks to Genesis, it echoes in Deuteronomy, it reappears in Good, and even more disturbingly, it is quoted by Jesus, not to correct it, not to soften it, but to use it. I'm not going to deal with that right now. Not yet, but I need to warn you before you continue. The clues are not in modern theories, not even in secret books, not even in recent conspiracy theories. They are in Hebrew, in the intentional repetition of words, in the structure that almost no one analyzes, and most importantly, in genealogies. Those long lists, those pages that you skip, those parts that seem to say nothing, that's where the text begins to explain itself. And that's where superficial reading begins to fail. Because once you realize what this psalm is really doing, he won't leave her mind anymore and ignore it. It ceases to be an honest option. Psalm 82 is not an isolated verse. It does not exist in a vacuum. It doesn't appear by chance in the middle of the Psalter. He talks. A conversation with Genesis, where God speaks in the plural without explanation. A conversation with Deuteronomy, where the nations are divided in a strangely administrative way. Conversation with Job, where sons of God present themselves before the Lord as members of a court. And, in a deeply unsettling way, he talks to Jesus. That alone should be cause for discomfort, because isolated texts can be discarded. They can be called the exception of exaggerated poetry from ancient symbolic language. But texts that connect, texts that are repeated, texts that echo one another across centuries, these are not accidents. Theologians have been debating Psalm 82 for hundreds of years, not because he is obscure, not because Hebrew is undecipherable, not because there is a lack of manuscripts. They argue because the text is too clear. Clear enough to be dangerous. Dangerous because he says exactly what he seems to say. And that's exactly why it needs to be domesticated. The problem starts with one word: a word that appears twice in the same verse, applied to different characters. Elohim, it's not a rare word, it's not an unusual poetic construction, it is a central term in biblical faith. And here, it is not softened, it is not explained. It is not protected by editorial comments. It is simply used. First for God, then for others. The text doesn't seem concerned with avoiding confusion. It doesn't try to anticipate the modern reader. It does not provide a footnote. He just follows. And that creates a real problem. Because if these gods are just a metaphor, so the text exaggerates dangerously. He creates a scene that didn't need to exist. It's building an unnecessary assembly. He makes God speak with entities that have no real existence. This is not typical biblical style. The Bible doesn't waste narrative structures. What if these gods are just a metaphor? So the problem is much bigger, because doctrinal structures are beginning to creak. Categories are starting to overlap. Definitions taught as simple. They reveal old cracks. It's not a technical detail. It's not an academic curiosity. This is not something that can be relegated to a theological appendix. It's a pressure point. One point where modern reading encounters resistance. If Psalm 82 is wrong, therefore he shouldn't be in the Bible. Simple as that. It contradicts what many believe to be the core of faith. He creates confusion where there should be clarity. It opens the door to dangerous interpretations, and texts like that are usually removed. But he didn't go. It never was. It has survived centuries of copying, translation, and revision. He survived rabbinical debates. It passed through early Christianity intact. It was preserved by traditions that upheld orthodoxy. Nobody deleted it because they couldn't. And that pushes us towards the second possibility. If the text is correct, so something very old was softened over time. Not removed, uncensored, but reinterpreted. Reorganization. I'm reading it in an increasingly secure way. Perhaps there was no conspiracy. Perhaps there was no bad faith involved. Perhaps there was only fear of what the text suggests. Because Psalm 82 doesn't just challenge abstract ideas. He challenges theological comfort. He suggests that the spiritual world is more structured than we imagine, more hierarchical, more political, more judicial, and this requires a slower reading pace. Be more careful, more honest. The problem then is not simply, who are these gods? The problem is that the text requires, let's admit, that our inherited reading, it may have been too superficial for such an old document and so intentional. And once that suspicion arises, she won't leave easily, because if Psalm 82 is saying exactly what it seems to say, so it's not the text that's out of place, it's us. The Hebrew does not hesitate. He doesn't ask permission from the modern reader. It doesn't soften the impact. It offers no alternatives. The word used for God and the word used for the gods, it's the same. Elohim, in the same verse, in the same sentence, without prior notice. This is not a grammatical oversight. It's not a scribal error. It's not exaggerated poetry. It's structure. Elohim is in the assembly of El. In the midst of the Elohim, he judges. But the text is not trying to protect you from this phrase. He doesn't interrupt the flow to explain. He simply moves on. Two uses, a scenario, an implicit hierarchy. And here's the detail that almost nobody notices. The verb is not symbolic. This, judge, real action, present tense, legal scene. This does not describe an emotional state. It does not describe an abstract idea. It describes an event, an assembly. And assemblies in the Bible are never merely decorative. They exist to decide something. The question is not with. There is a trial. The question is who he is being judged. Then comes the accusation, not against wooden idols, not against pagan peoples, not against humans, but against those who they already held authority. How long will you judge unjustly? And will you favor the wicked? This sentence carries administrative weight. Judging here doesn't mean giving an opinion. It's about governing. It's about deciding destinations. These beings had a function. they had jurisdiction, they had a responsibility, and they failed. The Bible never accuses those who have not been given authority. The text continues without changing its tone, without changing the subject. No smooth transition. Defend the weak and the orphan. Do justice to the afflicted and the needy. These are not orders given to ordinary human beings. These are demands made on those who govern. That's throne language, cut of moral governance. And then comes the partial sentence, not final yet, but revealing they know nothing, nor do they understand anything. They walk in darkness. In the Bible, darkness is never simply intellectual ignorance. Darkness is moral collapse. They are in reverse order. They are authorities without justice. Genesis begins with darkness, and darkness always precedes judgment. Whenever the Bible speaks of darkness, something is about to be removed. Notice the repetition. The text accuses, then repeat. Then it goes deeper. This is standard judicial procedure. Accusation, trial, diagnosis. Nothing here sounds improvised. Nothing here seems too metaphorical to hold up. And then the psalm does something even more unsettling. He doesn't change characters. The scenery remains unchanged. It doesn't wake the reader up by saying, that was symbolic. He continues, as if expecting the reader to understand that that assembly was real or enough to demand a trial. Symbolic texts often explain themselves. Legal texts know. The problem for the modern reader, it's because we've been trained to read too fast. We went through old words with recent definitions. Gods has become an automatic synonym for false idols. But the text doesn't allow that here, because idols don't judge. Idols don't administer justice. Idols are not held responsible. Hebrew does not confuse these categories. We got confused. And the further the text progresses, it becomes clearer that he is not speaking on wrong beliefs, but on wrong authorities. This changes everything. When the error lies with an authority figure, the trial is not symbolic. The text does not blink. Don't hesitate. It doesn't soften, he claims, and he expects you to follow along. And if you don't keep up, the problem is not in scripture, it's keeping pace with the reading. Here's the point that almost nobody notices. The Bible doesn't use just one word for everything that is spiritual. She doesn't work with blurred categories. She doesn't mix up terms carelessly. The difference, be careful, with intention. And when an ancient text chooses words with precision, ignoring this precision is not humility, it's carelessness. If the words change, the structure changes. Angel is not Elohim. The common word for angel is malach, messenger. Function, mission, shipping. But malachit does not appear in Psalm 82. The text could have used, he didn't use it. This is not a technical detail, it's a textual decision. If the author wanted to say angels, he knew how. Seraphim are not cherubim. Seraphim appear in Isaiah 6, associated with fervent holiness. Cherubim appear guarding Eden, associated with boundaries and protection. Distinct functions, different environments, distinct terms, and none of them are used here. Psalm 82 chooses another word, Elohim, the same word used in the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created Elohim. When the same word reappears, the echo is not accidental. Now pay attention to the contrast. When the Bible wants to talk about human judges, she knows how to do that too. In Exodus 21 and 22, for example, the term can refer to human authorities in a judicial context. But there the setting is clearly earthly. There are civil disputes. There is a refund. There is a direct social context. In Psalm 82, the scenario is different. There is no city. There is no temple. There is no human king appointed. There is a meeting. The word used for assembly here is Sadat el Assembly of God. It's not a municipal council. It's not a tribal court. It's divine cut. If the setting is celestial, why do we insist on making it terrestrial? The text does not describe men going up to be judged. It describes God rising up in the midst of others. This changes the direction of the scene. It's not humanity being examined. It is spiritual authority being challenged. And then comes another overlooked distinction: children of the Most High. This expression is not used randomly for just anyone. She carries the weight of belonging to heaven. In Job 1, sons of God present themselves before the Lord. In Deuteronomy 32, the nations are divided according to the number of the sons of God. The phrase reappears with the same weight, with the same elevated context. Repeated words in elevated contexts. They are never coincidences. Now consider the most uncomfortable contrast. The text says, "You are gods, yet you will die like men." If they were ordinary men, that sentence wouldn't make sense. No one says to humans, "You will die like humans." The sentence is shocking because there is a distinction between category and destination, between identity and punishment. The threat only works when the category is real. And here's the silent turning point. For centuries, readers have been trained to reduce spiritual categories in order to preserve theological simplicity. Everything turns into an angel. Everything becomes a metaphor. Everything becomes figurative language. But the Hebrew text does not do that. It maintains layers. It maintains hierarchies, maintains specific terms. Don't confuse messenger with council member. Don't confuse creature with judge. We got confused because keeping things simple is comfortable. Spiritual hierarchy is uncomfortable. Whenever the Bible complicates our understanding, perhaps it is our structure that needs to be reviewed. And then we realize something even more disturbing. Psalm 82 does not present a chaotic universe. It presents an organized universe, with advice, with responsibility, with accountability. The problem is not polytheism. The problem is administrative corruption on an invisible level. This does not weaken biblical monotheism. He radicalizes it. Because it shows that sovereignty does not mean loneliness. It means supremacy. Supremacy only makes sense when there are others below. And this is where many prefer to stop reading. Why accept linguistic distinctions? It means accepting ontological distinctions. It means acknowledging that the Bible describes a more structured spiritual world than our simplified versions allow. It's not the text that created the tension. The tension has always been there. She was just hiding in the word that we repeat without asking what it really means. And once you realize that Elohim, it's a category, not an exclusive name, reading never returns to its previous state. The turnaround isn't noisy. There is no thunder. There is no mystical revelation. There is only one silent realization. The text never confused the categories. We're the ones who got confused. And now that the distinction has been seen, she cannot be unseen. Genealogies are not dead lists. They never were. They don't exist to fill space. They are not there to test patience. They do not exist due to cultural tradition. Genealogies are maps, authority maps, inheritance maps, responsibility maps. And when the Bible repeats names, lineages, divisions, she's marking her territory. Nothing that determines inheritance is accidental. In Deuteronomy 32a, text emerges that almost always goes unnoticed, not because it's difficult, but because it is surrounded by poetic language that anesthetizes the reader. When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons from the sons, established the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the children of God. Read it again. It was divided. They separated. He set limits. This is not vague poetry. It's administrative language. It does not describe spiritual inspiration. Describes management. Whenever the Bible speaks of limits, someone is being placed under authority. Now comes the detail that changes everything. Many modern translations say, according to the number of the children of Israel. But the oldest manuscripts, prior to theological standardization, they don't say that. They say children of God. That's not a small difference. It's a structural change. Because Israel did not yet exist as a nation at the time the text is written. There were not 12 formed tribes. There was no complete Israelite genealogy, but humanity was divided. You don't distribute inheritance to those who haven't been born yet. The text describes a primordial event prior to the history of Israel, prior to the law, before the temple, a time when nations were organized, distributed, not by luck, not by chance, but by design. And then the next verse does something strange. It separates Israel, for the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is part of your inheritance. Do you see the structure? First, nations are divided. Next, Israel is highlighted as an exception. Exceptions only exist when there is a higher rule. This creates a pattern. Nations under delegated spiritual authority. Israel under the direct authority of YHWH. It's not abandonment, it's administration. And this pattern explains something that otherwise wouldn't make sense. Why does Daniel speak of a prince of Persia? Why is a divine messenger resisted for days? Why is the battle not just political? Because conflicts don't begin on land. They reflect an old division. If authority is invisible, the conflict will also be there. Now return to the genealogies. Each people group in the Bible carries a lineage, a founding name, a traceable origin, not just biological, but spiritual. Genealogies connect people to territories and promises to authorities. When these lines are ignored, the text appears fragmented. But when they are read as a map, everything is starting to fall into place. Lists are just boring when you don't know what they decide. And then Psalm 82 reappears, not as an isolated poem, not as a theological deviation, but as a consequence. A trial doesn't happen without a history. A trial does not arise without precedent. Psalm 82 is the moment when the administration fails. She is finally confronted. The gods judge there. They are the same ones who received authority before, not creators, not the same, delegates. And now, those responsible. The larger the inheritance, the higher the charge. This changes the entire reading experience. Psalm 82 does not introduce any new characters. He summons old figures to the defendant's bench. Genealogy explains the court. The division explains the accusation. The inheritance explains the sentence. Without a genealogy, the psalm seems strange. With genealogy, it becomes inevitable. The text was never confusing. He was always connected. And there's something even more unsettling about all of this. Because if the trial takes place after the division, so the problem wasn't the original plan, it was corruption in the exercise of authority. This is not open rebellion. It's unfair administration. And this echoes a pattern that the Bible repeats at all levels. In the sky, on land, in kings, in priests, in leadership, God does not judge position. He judges loyalty to the position. So when Psalm 82 declares that these beings will die like men, this is not poetic exaggeration. It's a loss of status. It's dismissal. It's the end of the inheritance. The genealogy that placed them there, it is the same one that condemns them, and that connects everything. Genesis, Deuteronomy, Daniel. Psalms, nothing comes from nothing. Psalm 82 is not a rupture, it's the closing of a cycle. And when you realize that the parts you always skipped, they reveal themselves to be the most dangerous, because they were there, that the text was explaining itself from the beginning. Then comes the verdict. There is no emotional preparation. There is no rhetorical softening. There is no attempt to console the reader. The entire sentence falls apart. Without warning, I said, "You are gods, all of you children of the Most High. However, you will die like men." It's not a light metaphor. It's not a poetic figure of speech for humiliation. It's not symbolic language for loss of influence. It is conviction. The sentence structure is legal. First, recognition of the position. Then the revocation of destiny. The Bible never takes anything away without first stating that it existed. I said, "You are gods." That's administrative history. A previous appointment, a royal assignment. The text does not say, you called yourselves gods. It doesn't say, you pretended to be gods. It says, I said, authority granted, delegated function, recognized status. And then the rupture. However, that word carries weight. She defies expectations. She reverses the course. Nevertheless, you will die like men. It's not just death, it is relegation. It is the loss of what distinguished them. It's the collapse of the category. The punishment is not disappearing, it's falling. That solves the mystery, but it brings no relief, because now the text makes perfect sense. He is not suggesting that God has ceased to be unique. He never suggests that. It never comes close to that. What he's suggesting is something far more uncomfortable. That God was never alone, but it was always above. Sovereignty does not mean isolation. It means supremacy. These gods are not rivals. They are not equivalent. These are not alternatives. They are delegates, administrators of something that did not belong to them. Those responsible for something they received in trust, and they failed. The greater the delegated authority, stricter accountability. The text does not describe open rebellion. It doesn't mention direct warfare. It makes no mention of an attempt to dethrone the Almighty. He is accusing us of something more subtle: injustice, bias, protection for the wicked, neglecting the weak. This is administrative corruption, and corruption is always more dangerous rather than frontal opposition. The most effective enemy, that's what governs badly. The sentence, you will die like men. It's not just biological, it is ontological. They don't cease to exist. They cease to occupy the space. They are losing ground. They lose jurisdiction, they lose their inheritance. The text does not describe annihilation, describes dismissal. And this echoes an old pattern. Kings deposed, rejected priests, leaders removed. Whenever authority fails to reflect justice, it is removed. In the sky and on land, God's standard does not change with the level of the creature. This makes the psalm unsettling, because it is not self-contained. It doesn't end with a celebration. It doesn't end with a visible victory. It doesn't end with immediate restoration. It ends on a high note, as if to say, the trial began, but it's not over yet. And here's the most disturbing point. If these beings were deprived, someone needs to fill the space. Authority cannot exist without power. Jurisdiction doesn't disappear on its own. Every fall creates a vacuum. The text does not explain how this happens. It doesn't detail the process. It doesn't satisfy curiosity. He simply states the verdict, and it leaves the reader with an uneasy feeling. That makes sense, and that's exactly why. That's unsettling, because it doesn't solve everything. It doesn't close all doors. It doesn't answer all the questions. He simply aligns the pieces. Enough so that you realize the problem was never the text. The problem was imagining it. What spiritual authority? It would have no real consequences. And after that sentence, the psalm does not allow for return, for comfortable reading. Because now you know there was an appointment, there was a mistake, there was a trial, and when God judges authority, he doesn't do it quietly. The text makes sense, too much, and that's exactly it, which makes it impossible to ignore. Whenever the inheritance comes close, resistance increases. This doesn't begin with Psalm 82. Psalm 82 merely explains it. Before the promise, there is pressure. Before the inauguration, there is intimidation. Before the advance, there is organized opposition. It's no coincidence, it never was. Conflict never arises in the middle of the road. He appears on the threshold. When Israel approaches the land, giants emerge. When Moses goes up the mountain, idolatry explodes below. When the temple is about to be rebuilt, the opposition is rising up with strategy. The pattern is outdated, repeated, too consistent to be ignored. And Psalm 82 forces us to admit something uncomfortable: the mistake that led to the trial. It wasn't spiritual in a mystical sense. He was administrative. It wasn't an open rebellion. It was unfair management. These gods are not accused of denying the existence of God. They are not accused of trying to dethrone him. They are not accused of creating another religious system. They are accused of governing poorly, to favor the wicked, to abandon the weak, to distort justice, the greatest attack on God's plan. It rarely comes from abroad. It stems from the misuse of granted authority. This changes the entire application, because Psalm 82 is not only interested in whom these beings they were. He is exposing a pattern of operation, delegated authority, real responsibility. Accountability is inevitable. And this permeates all levels of biblical reality, in the sky, on land, in kings, in priests, in spiritual leaders, in systems. Whenever authority is granted, it becomes a point of proof. God does not test intentions, he tests administration. And here's the point that bothers me the most. The text doesn't end by asking, who were these gods? This curiosity is almost irrelevant. The real question is something else, and the text never states it directly. He just leaves her hanging. Who occupies that position today? Not in the sense of mystical identity, but in a functional sense. Who controls the narratives? Who shapes values? Who defines what is fair and what is acceptable? Who decides who deserves protection and who can be discarded? These questions don't belong to the past. Whenever authority changes hands, the pattern reappears. Psalm 82 does not merely describe an ancient judgment, he describes a criterion, and the criteria haven't changed. An authority that fails to reflect justice, it is removed. Perhaps not immediately, perhaps not visibly, but inevitably. This creates a real spiritual tension, because if the pattern continues, so the world isn't simply fallen, he is management. And where there is administration, there is responsibility. The Bible never describes chaos as random. There's always someone answering for him. This explains why fear arises. When the promise draws near, it explains why there is organized resistance. When something is about to change, it explains why systems become oppressive, just when they are about to be confronted. The pattern is not emotional, it's structural. And Psalm 82 forces us to realize that the battle was never just internal, not just psychological. She is spiritual, because it is hierarchical. All spiritual warfare is, at its core, a dispute over jurisdiction. And here is the most demanding application. If God judged spiritual authorities through negligence and injustice, why imagine that any authority today would it be exempt from this criterion? This is not a threat. It's not moralizing. This is not religious discourse, it's textual coherence. The same God, the same pattern, the same weight. Psalm 82 offers no comfort. It offers alignment. He doesn't call on the reader to feel powerful. It calls upon the reader to become lucid. Because once you understand that the problem was never the existence of spiritual authority, but its misuse, you begin to see the world in a different way. The text does not ask if there is a battle. He asks if you realize where it happens. And perhaps that is the reason, which is why Psalm 82 has been read for so long without actually being confronted, because it doesn't allow for neutrality. He doesn't leave the reader out of the structure. It does not allow for distant observation. He hints, silently, that all time of promise, active proportional resistance, may every real advance it provokes real opposition, and that all authority it will be, sooner or later, called to respond. The pattern is not dead. He just keeps operating, under different names, different systems, different languages, but with the same logic. And after realizing that return to comfortable reading, it becomes impossible. Psalm 82 does not end with a celebration. It doesn't end with a visible victory. It doesn't end with emotional relief. There is no singing. There is no answer from heaven. No restoration is described. There is only one request. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for all nations belong to you. It's not a doxology, it's a summons. It's not gratitude, it's urgent. When a text ends with a request, that's because something is still up in the air. The psalm does not say that the judgment has been concluded, it says it has begun. He does not claim that the land has already been reclaimed. She claims that she belongs goodbye, as something that still needs to be claimed. This changes the whole tone, because the declared possession, it is not the same as possession exercised. There are things that belong to God. Before they reflected on God's government, nothing was denied in the text. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was explained to make the reading more comfortable. The trial took place. The accusation has been made. The sentence has been pronounced. But the world goes on. The nations continue. The structures remain. The systems continue to operate. The text does not resolve this tension. He hands it over to the reader. Some texts don't close cycles. They transfer weight. The pattern continues. Delegated authority. Corruption is entrenched. Judgment announced. Dismissal declared. But the replacement, it is not described. And that's unsettling because of authority vacuums. They are not silent. They create disputes. They produce instability. They produce resistance. Where authority falls, something is trying to occupy the space. The strategy remains. It doesn't change over time. It doesn't age with culture. It doesn't adapt to modern language. She's just disguising herself. Where there is a promise, there is opposition. Where there is inheritance, there is a dispute. Where God claims ownership, there are systems that resist, not because they are strong, but why are they still there? The text does not say that the enemy won. He says he hasn't left yet. And the conflict, it's not over, not because God hesitates. But why trial and resumption? They are not the same event. Psalm 82 does not describe the end of the story. Describe the moment in the story. You can no longer pretend that everything is in order. It is the moment when injustice is named, where authority is challenged, in which the sky declares that it saw. The trial begins, when the illusion of neutrality ends, and then the text stops. Not because it's over, but because it doesn't need to continue. He has already done enough. He displaced the reader. It broke the comfortable reading experience. It created a fracture that won't close on its own. Because after seeing that, ignore the text. It's no longer an honest option. You may disagree. You can resist. You can try reducing it. But you can't pretend you didn't see it. Some texts do not require agreement. They demand a stance. Psalm 82 doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't ask for blind faith. It doesn't require an immediate response. He just stays there, like a burden. As a reminder of that, the visible world, it doesn't exhaust the story. That authority always answers to something greater. That justice is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of criteria. And perhaps the most disturbing aspect, let it not be the judgment of the gods, but the silence that follows. The silence that suggests that the final request is still in progress. Arise, O God, judge the earth. Not because God is absent, but because the earth still reflects governments that shouldn't last. When the text ends in a sentence, that's because the answer is still unfolding in history. The weight that remains, it's not fear. It's not excitement. It's not a triumph. It's lucidity. The perception that there has never been an existence of spiritual conflict. He pretended that it had no consequences. And after going through this psalm, there is no going back to innocent reading. There is only the silent question, which the text refuses to formulate aloud, but it continues to echo, not as an accusation, not as a threat, as a reality. And the silence that follows, it's too heavy to be ignored.